back to the channel. Welcome back to my midlife crisis. In this video, we're doing a little bit of safety and security. I want to drive this car. I want to drive it very fast, safely, where I should be. As you saw in the first video with Kevin Prickett from SupercarGarageATL and McMedics, we've got some problems with the brake. We are missing hardware. Brake pads, according to him, are as thin as a business card. And so today I'm going to show you guys how to do a rear and front brake pad replacement, as well as we'll do a brake fluid flush without MDS. So call it the poor man's brake fluid flush, but we're gonna jump right into it. But before we do that, let me take you back to everything that Kevin said was wrong with my brake pad.
If you can't see on the camera, the business card is about how thick these brake pads are.
Your brake caliper bolt is backing out.
Here's the bolt for the brake caliper, and look, I'm actually able to turn it by hand. You're missing the brake rubber over here, so your sensor's broken, but look,
Right.
you're missing a pin right here for the brake that holds the brake pads in.
So I'm missing the top one, the bottom one's there. I'm missing the springs too, aren't I?
Yeah, there's supposed to be a tension spring.
This is not a safety concern.
So not only are we going to replace the brake pads and do the brake fluid flush, I also went ahead and got new tires. As you guys remember from the first video, we were running some 2017 Continental constant contact tires. I swapped those out with some Michelin Pilot Sport 4S's all weather. We're also going to replace a lot of the missing hardware. So almost all of the fender liners have been out multiple times. The fender liner on the passenger front, we weren't even sure what car that fender liner was from.
A little sag in the fender liner. I'm sure it's got some stories to tell.
Yeah,
It's actually not put together properly. This is not the factory fender liner for this car, I don't believe.
It's cut up, it's in 3 different pieces. We're gonna take that out, we're gonna replace it with a new used McLaren 650S fender liner. We're gonna get all the hardware fitted and make sure that we're in good shape. Let's jump into it and show you everything we're gonna use to do the brake pad replacement and the brake fluid flush. Okay, so one of the big problems that Kevin found is you'll see down here, I not only have bad brake pads, but I'm kind of missing some hardware. I don't have the tension retainer clip. I only have one of the 2 pins, and it's just kind of just sitting back here wiggling. It's completely loose. So want to make sure that we get all that hardware replaced. And at first I was like, maybe I can just buy the retaining clips, maybe I can just buy the pins themselves. I found that you can buy the pins themselves, but nowhere in the United States. So I was gonna go with aftermarket pads, maybe some Paget RSRs or something like that. But I ended up going with McLaren OEM brake pads just for one specific reason. Let me show you what that is. So this is what you get in the McLaren OEM brake pad clip. And the main thing that I wanted is I needed the tension clips and I needed the brake pins in order to make sure I had all the hardware that I needed. So this is the rear kit. The rear kits, if you guys don't know, they're AP Racing 4-piston caliper brakes. Now the thing that I found funny is because I've done a couple different brakes for different exotic cars. There's 3 different logos on these brake pads. So we have AP Racing, we have Techstar, and then we also on the front, we have Brembo. And I didn't know this, but Brembo owns a lot of different brake manufacturers. These are primarily AP Racing is what McLaren uses, but I was like, wow. So if you ever need to cross-reference part numbers or anything like that, I'll give you a close-up of part numbers from the brake pads just so you can see them. For the front caliper on the McLaren 650S, it's a same thing. It's an AP Racing, but it's a 6-piston caliper. And so the brake pads are obviously a little bit bigger for stopping power. These again are Brembo AP Racing. They say Techstar on them. We'll give you a close-up of them so you can see all the different part numbers. But the one thing that's different about the front brakes is we've got the separate spring and retainer clips, and I'll show you how that goes on. I had to fudge with it a little bit on the first one that I tried. Then again, we've got to have those pins to keep the brake pads in. So after we're done changing out all the brake pads, we're gonna do the poor man's non-McLaren MDS because I don't have MDS. I don't want to go to the McLaren service. We're going to do a brake fluid flush following Sean from McMedics EMF Autos procedure from his video on changing out the brake fluid in the McLaren MP4-12C, 650S, 675LT, all your P11 chassis cars. So for that, we're going to use the same one that he did, which is the liquid moly brake fluid DOT 5.1 brake fluid. So the main thing here is whether it's liquid moly or something else is to just make sure it's a 5.1 high temperature brake fluid. First thing we're going to do, and we don't have to do very much of it on this one because we're missing all that hardware, is we're gonna basically punch out retaining pins. And so you'll see right here, you have 2 different holes. And we're just using a small punch tool. We're gonna pop it right there. Use a just gonna pop it through to a certain extent. and then it's just gonna pop out the back just like that. So we're not gonna reuse these, and I recommend that you don't reuse your pins or your clips, and just change out your brake hardware if you're gonna change out your pads. You don't have to. It's just, I've always thought that it was the best way to do it. So now, normally, if this was a well-sorted McLaren, you would have an actual wear sensor here, but as you can see, I'm missing it, just like I'm missing halfway everything else on this car. So we will be replacing that wear sensor. The brake pads, they just slide right out the back. As you can see, I mean, it's got a little bit left on it, but it's definitely probably time to change it. I don't know, tell me down in the comments, do you think this was I mean, obviously it was a worthwhile change because I'm missing all the hardware, but what are the brake pads doing? So sometimes you'll get in a situation where it's a little bit hard to get out, and sometimes your brake pads just don't want to come out, and so you're gonna have to. Now be careful, your carbon ceramic rotors, you don't want to crack them, chip them, pry against them, anything like that. So I'm pushing from the inside, as you can see, and it's little by little, it's coming out. But now I can go a little bit with the screwdriver and just wiggle back and forth, pushing from the other side until the brake pad comes out. And as you can see, it just takes a little patience and finesse. Wish I had either of those, but we're gonna give it a shot. And eventually it'll just come out. This one definitely looks a little bit more worn than the other one. I mean, they're about even worn, but definitely think it was time for them to get replaced. So as you can see here, we've got this rotor, but the rotor's not spinning. Let me show you a little trick inside the car. Make sure when you're doing your back, you have the freedom to move the rotor, move the brake disc around, so that in case you need to make sure it spins, let's get this emergency brake release so the rotor will spin freely. In order to get the emergency brake caliper to release and make sure that we can freely move the rotor as we're testing to make sure we have everything cleared, put your foot on the brake. Don't start the car. Make sure your rev limiter goes all the way over. And then now you're gonna hold down your parking brake until the red light goes off. Now, while you do that, put your foot on the brake. You'll notice that the red light went off, and now your emergency brake is off, and now you can freely work on the car with no problems up on the jack stand. So now you can see I can freely move the rotor. The emergency brake is off, and now we're ready to replace the brake pad. So before we actually press pistons within the caliper, we want to make sure we have an ability to relieve pressure from the brake fluid. So we're going to go ahead and take the reservoir cap off of the brake fluid, and I'll show you guys a little trick. For those that don't know, right underneath your hood is your brake fluid reservoir up here in the driver's top. We're gonna go ahead and take that cap off. That way, as we compress the pistons, the air from the system will have somewhere to go. What I do is I cut a little sliver, a little hole in just a rag or whatever shop towel that you have. What I do is, because we're gonna be basically, relieving the pressure from the caliper, if that brake fluid comes up, it's highly corrosive. I just want something up here that can catch it. So I just cut a hole in the rag, leave it around just in case any of that brake fluid comes bubbling up. Without taking the caliper off, and to get the brake pads in from this side, you feel inside here, you'll see that the pistons are not compressed. This is a tool I got off of Amazon. It's called the 5 Bananas caliper piston spreader, whatever. And it's just a wrench that allows you to spread the caliper. So we're gonna give it a shot in this video. And it just compresses piston without you having to put any pressure on the disc. That way the brake pad will slide in a lot easier. And now when it stops going, now you can release it, pop out, and that's compressed, and that side's compressed. If you're using chemicals and stuff, you're supposed to use gloves. And that's because we're gonna put some brake lubricant slide glide. So as the pistons contact the back of the brake pad, you wanna lubricate it, you wanna eliminate that squealing. Get a little bit on there, and then just smother it on the back side of your brake pad. And then we're going to slide right in, and you'll see right now it's halfway in, but I'll show you a trick to get them all the way in. If you had the brake wear sensor, you would pop it in that little spot right there. That's where the brake sensor would go, and then when it wore all the way through, that would, the car would tell you that your brake pads need to be replaced. You should look at them, see if they're worn. And so you just wiggle it all the way in. You see the back one, it went all the way in. Let me show you a little bit of trick to help persuade brake pads to go in. A little bit of Italian persuasion. Don't be afraid to be a little bit rough with your brake pads to get them in. Make sure, obviously, you can still spin. Your brake pads are in. Now it's time to put in the tension clip and your pins and get it locked in there. So now we're gonna go ahead and put our pin in on the far side. You're gonna put it in from the inside. Now you may have to use a screwdriver here a little bit to finagle, push that through. The way that the clip's gonna work is the arrow faces down. It's gonna slide right behind that. So you can go ahead and put that in there right now. Here comes the hard part. We've got to get behind it and hammer that in. Yeah, this is not comfortable, but you're gonna have to hammer the pin in from the inside, and so it has a kind of a spring lock that you have to, it self compresses, so after you get it through, it'll hold itself in. So we're gonna hammer it in from this side. Even after you get it in, you're gonna wanna give it a good whack. So now the spring, so that's gonna fit under the top clip and it's gonna go down right there. And the bottom pin is gonna hold that in. So that now we've gotta get both of them hammered in completely so that it holds it in and then it holds the brake pads in. So these are still got a little bit more room to punch through, which I'm gonna go ahead and get a smaller punch to do. But as you can see, the tensioner spring is there, 2 pins, we're still freely turning. And that's it for replacing your rear brake pads. So a couple of things I want to get done before we put the tires back on the rear after the brake. I went ahead and took out the entire fender liner so I can get to a few things. So this is one of those things where you're like, you know what, I need to get these done while I'm in there. As you guys remember, when I replaced the brakes, I said that I was missing the brake wear sensor. Here is the brake wear sensor. As you can see, I think the previous dealer or somebody along the way in the life of this car taped that together so they could get rid of the warning on the dash that the brakes were needing to be replaced. Usually you see this with somebody who's tracking the car and, you know, pays attention to their brake pads all the time and doesn't want to have to worry about the sensors every time they replace the brake. But since I only have one in this condition, my guess is they're a lucky recipient of somebody who didn't want to replace the brake wear sensor. So I ordered one of these. We'll get it replaced and hopefully get that in. All that does is it plugs up right here, right next to where the speed wheel sensor is. Another thing that I replaced is this back reflector. Now this is the one that I had. As you can see, it's all cracked up. Not exactly sure what happened to it. Bought a used one on eBay. $100 bicycle reflector. Come on, guys. Secondhand, McLaren tax. So got that replaced. Pretty simple to get to. So back here, there's just 2 little Torx. Pops right in. Nothing too hard about that, but it's just while I'm in here, get that replaced. There's 2 more things that I want to get done while we're in there. And I noticed this on the other fender liners, is that all of the TPMS sensors, and this is something that Kevin pointed out, are mounted incorrectly. They're mounted upside down. So we're just gonna flip that over, make sure it's mounted correctly. And the last thing is, I had maybe 5 bolts seeing this fender liner in. 5 Torx, I think 2 bolts, you know, maybe 7 altogether. It takes about 10 to 15 different Torx bolts to hold in the fender liner. So we're gonna replace all that hardware, make sure the fender liner's in there properly. That way we don't have any missing holes or it flapping in the wind or anything like that. So it's just 2 10 mil bolts, and I put my finger on the other side to hold the Torx. All we do is take it off and flip it over. Now you can see it sits a lot tighter to the arch liner, and then the actual bolts have the ability to be recessed at this point now into the module. Just hand tight. It is correct. See how this is inset in there? That is how the TPMS sensor is supposed to be mounted on the fender liner. For the time being, because I want to drive the car, I'm going to put up this taped sensor back in and then make sure that I remember to replace it. Y'all keep me accountable. There we go. Snaps in. All right, let's get our fender liner back in around the tire. Got the TPMS plugged in. Now let's get all the fender liner hardware in. Last bolt on the fender liner. Too many bolts in the McLaren fender liners. All right, before we jump into the front brakes, let me show you kind of everything that's wrong with the front brakes and why I wanted to leave this one to last, just because I think it's going to be the funnest. So as you can see, this fender liner is not from the McLaren 650S. It's just sagging. It's held together with push pins. We got some zip ties in here. So before we even start on the brakes, get this out and see if there's anything else we need to address before we tackle that big brake. But yeah, that's just nasty and wrong. I have a brand new 650S used fender liner that I think will fit a little bit better. So let's go ahead and get that replaced. Remember in the first video, we said we don't know where the hell they got this fender liner from, like it was from a different car. This is literally what I had to tear apart out of the wheel well to get it out of the McLaren. They used, I don't know what these are, if these are rivets, household screws. I literally had to saw this thing apart. It's got epoxy. They were gluing these together. They just didn't even spend the time to hide how bad this was. So I'm glad that's out. It took me longer than I thought. I have a used front fender liner here that I got off of eBay. We're gonna replace that, but now we're gonna jump into everything you guys need to know about changing the brake pads on the front caliper. AP Racing 6 caliper in the front. The nice thing about the front is we can turn it. So take the entire rotor and turn it all the way to the left, giving you full access to the back of the caliper. This is gonna make it a lot easier to get access to pull out the pins, pull out the clip, and get the new brake pads in. So on the back of the front calipers, we've got a kind of like a retaining bolt that's in between the two tension springs, but we still have the two same pins on the bottom. The thing you gotta remember is when you pull this pin, it's going to spring. There is some tension behind that, so make sure that your face is in front of it so it gets smashed, but we're gonna go ahead and hammer these out and get these pulled. Again, hammer, punch tool, something that you can put right in there, put it right on the bolt, and just pull one out. Let's go do the other one. All right, got those out, pull that. Even after you've tapped a little bit with the hammer and everything, grab some pliers, channel locks, and just kind of pull it out from the other side. And as you can see, that clip just popped out, old pin. So again, got the bottom out. These are channel locks, and boom, the spring goes underneath the car. So here we go. As you guys can see, it's, like I said, two separate tension clips, top and bottom. And now we just got to get this one bolt out. It has an Allen on the back. I'm going to go get everything, see what size it is, and we're going to unscrew that, because that is what's separating us from getting these two brake pads out. So this part right here is what's holding them in. This is a Allen. It's an H8. H is in hotel. H8. And it literally is just, you know. Now you see right here, it's coming out. It's got the threads on this far side right here, and it's just gonna pop out. Now, it may be a little hard to get out just because it's old and rusty. I'm gonna use a little bit of persuasion with the tap to just pull it out, because this right here is the bolt. This is just a cylinder that holds it in. This bar right here is between those two, and that goes through it. Now this is the one part that we will reuse as part of this. The clips, the pins, we're gonna use all brand new from McLaren to make sure that we are using new brake hardware. So the brake pads, you know, they may not be fully compressed. And so all I'm doing, you don't wanna use any leverage against the carbon ceramic rotor. I'm literally just taking a screwdriver and going into the holes where the pins are, and just a little bit by a little bit using leverage to pull it out. The nice part about this one, we do have a brake wear sensor. It is intact, so we got to pop that out from very old crappy brake pads. So all I'm going to use is a little flat tip screwdriver to kind of pry that out. So here's the brake wear sensor. We're going to leave that intact because we're going to put that back into the new brake pad. So we're just going to leave that to the side. And again, we're just going to keep on prying until we get that brake pad all the way out. All right, and just keep on wiggling, and eventually that brake pad is going to come out. One brake pad down, one to go. Sometimes it just pulls out after you pry too hard. So before we put our brake pads on again, we're gonna use some brake lubricant. Anywhere where the metal touches metal, we wanna put something to just help with the friction. Wear and tear, squealing, anywhere where there's gonna be metal touching. We've got where the sensor's gonna stick in. We're gonna put that in after we get it a little bit ways in. This side looks like it's compressed, so we're gonna try to slide this in. So sometimes when the brake pad just doesn't slide in, a little bit of be gentle. This is an official McLaren tool. Getting the brake sensor in, a little bit of persuasion. You don't want to break it though, and just push it in. And it's going to slide right into the existing brake pad. And then we go back to our persuader until we get pad seated to where we want it. The goal is to kind of knock it to where the pins are going to go through. So I'm just using what was part of my 5-banana caliper. I'm sliding it in here, and I'm using the metal side of the rotor, not the rotor itself, to push again in order to get these pistons to push in, just like that. Got it in there. Now we got this right where the pins are. It still spins. We have not chipped the carbon ceramic rotor, and we're one step closer to getting this thing complete. All right, we're gonna go ahead and put our bolt clip in here because that's where the tensioners are going to come off of. So we're gonna just slide through that all the way back through, and then start tightening that. And what I'll do is I'll flash on the screen what the actual newton-meters, foot-pounds of torque that this needs to be tightened to. Right now I'm just gonna hand tighten it until we're done to the very end. We're gonna go with the bottom first, and then if it's not right, I'll redo the video. You've got the brand new bottom pin. You gotta sink it in from the backside, go through there, right? But before you do that, this tensioner is, you gotta sink that in up there. This goes in front of that to create that tension, and then that pin holds it. But here's the deal, that's gotta be up in there. On the bottom spring, you wanna make the long center piece go under the middle clip. That way, when you're pushing on it, it has a little bit of spring. See that spring action? Then you've got to bring your pin. Now this is the hard part, right? You got to push this in and get the pin in front of it. Now I'm sure there's some trick that somebody out on the internet is going to put into the comments that there's a better way to do this. I struggled with it, so I'm just gonna make it work. So I'm using these channel locks to hold the tension spring up against the clip because it needs to be tucked in there nice and well. Then I pushed back and got this pin just in front of that, and then I'm just going to kind of just give it a little bit of a hammer to get it across, so we hold that tension, and then I can let go and then put my clip all the way in. Arrow up
on the top, flat piece behind the clip, push it down, and then go ahead and put your pin in the top. Same thing, we gotta push it in to get it in front of the clip. One thing to do is if it's pulling up on you, pull it down, keep it down, just like we did on the bottom part, and then we can, you know, push it in a little bit, and then get the pin going all the way across. Sink it in the hole on the far side, and now we've got both pins in, both clips with the tension on. We're still moving just fine with our front wheel. And now we're gonna get ready to hammer those in so that we can get them set inside of the pin location. So now we're just gonna hit our pins all the way in until they come out the other side. So you can see right here where you see the little silver. When that happens, the pin is all the way through and in from the far side. So that's what you want to see as your final result. As you can see, tension clips are in, 2 brand new pins. Got to get this tightened. We're going to check a full nut and bolt check. So we want to make sure not only the caliper bolts are checked, but we want to make sure this middle tensioner is checked as well. So let me get the torque wrench and get these tightened up. Because we had so many bolts that we weren't sure whether they were torqued correctly or not, we want to make sure that the caliper bolts are torqued to 93 Newton meters of torque. You got the top one and the bottom one. This is a reverse kind of a star. It is actually called E16. This guy right here is 33 Newton meters of torque. So you're gonna have to go low. That is it for changing the front and the back brake calipers on your McLaren MP4-12C, 650S, or 675LT, any P11 chassis. So before we kind of button all this up, we're gonna get the new fender liner in, get our TPMS sensors connected back, and then what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and do what I call poor man's brake fluid flush without MDS. We are back, it is the next day. We are gonna do that poor man's brake fluid flush for my McLaren 650S. So I don't have the McLaren computer, the MDS system, to do a proper brake fluid flush where it's going through the ABS system and all that. So we're going to follow Sean's procedure from EMF Auto McMedics, which is to extract some of the old brake fluid and then drive it for about 100 miles and then extract it again and just slowly swap it out. At some point, you know, if you're doing multiple track days, you've got a lot of different, you know, miles on that brake fluid, you definitely need to do a proper brake fluid flush through the ABS, get all the air out, bleed it on the calipers. But what we're going to do is, just because we want to make sure we have some good brake fluid in there, we're going to do this MDS type brake fluid flush that Sean showed us in his video. So as you can see down here, this is the brake fluid reservoir, and you have a minimum and a maximum, and you want that fluid to be right in between those lines. As you can see right now, my current fluid is it's actually a little bit beyond maximum. So we're gonna drain out as much as we can in order to get some swapped out. And so let's get into it. So Sean used a turkey baster. We are going to use this fluid extractor. This is about a 200cc fluid extractor that I got on Amazon. It should be able to suck it out directly from that tip. Now, doing the same thing we did before, I've got my rag right around the fluid reservoir. Now, we're not going to take out the filter there, that little yellow insert right there. One, we want to make sure that nothing gets in there, as well as we keep the line above that. So we're going to go ahead and use the extractor and pull out as much as we can. Now the goal is to pull it very slow. That way we don't introduce any air into the system. And as you can see, we got quite a bit out there on our first pull of that brake fluid. So now we're going to fill it back up with brand new 5.1 liquid moly brake fluid and get it cycled through the system. And you just want to do a little dribble. That way, as it goes in, you're not introducing any new air bubbles to the system. We got it filled up again right between that minimum and maximum with a nice clear 5.1 liquid moly brake fluid. We're going to go ahead and put that cap back on. Now, we've got to get on the road, do 100 miles. It's going to take us a couple days, but then once that's done, we're going to follow that same procedure over again. And all we're doing is recycling the fluid, making sure we're not introducing any air into the system, and just trying to get out some of that old, darker fluid. As you guys will notice, this fluid is kind of dark, more golden brown, and the new stuff we're putting in is nice and clear, just in a lot better shape. So that's it. That is the poor man's brake fluid flush without MDS on my McLaren 650S. Pretty simple procedure. Hope you enjoyed this video on the brake pad replacement, as well as everything else I'm sorting on my McLaren 650S. If you like this video and you'd like to follow along as I do the renovation on this McLaren 650S, please give this video a big thumbs up. It helps the channel. Subscribe for any new updates, and we'll see you in the next video.